Hey everyone, Dan Saavedra here from mergerdata.com, and today we're going to be jumping into how you can create webhook subscriptions inside of private apps in HubSpot and why you might want to do that. So we'll be walking through some of the use cases as we go here, but we'll basically just be configuring webhook subscriptions in a private app and kind of talking through the pros and cons of the various configurations that you can make. So let's get into it. If you're inside of HubSpot, you'll be able to click on the settings icon in the upper right hand side. And as long as you have the permissions to configure private apps, you'll be good to go here. So we'll go to integrations, private apps on the left hand side. You might have to expand this integrations menu item. And then you're going to click on create a private app here. And when you do that, the configuration window is going to pop up and you'll have the three tabs up top of basic info, scopes, and webhooks. And so for this test, I'm just going to do private app webhooks test as the name. If you wanted to upload a logo, you could do that here and provide a description to tell others what this private app is specifically for. Next, you'll be able to go over to this scopes window here, and you will need to configure the specific scopes for your webhook subscriptions based off of the events that you choose. So for now, what we're going to do is we're going to leave this blank. And then what we're going to do is configure the webhook, see what permissions we need, and then go back and update those. So I'm going to go over to the webhooks tab right here. And as you can see, we have a lot of information packed into this one window. One, HubSpot calls out webhook settings can be cached for up to 5 minutes. So that's something to keep in mind in terms of seeing when your changes go into effect. The other thing is you have this event throttling configuration over here. Event throttling is pretty interesting to know about. So if you're not too familiar with it, I would definitely recommend hovering over that eye icon, the information icon, and then clicking on learn more so that you can kind of read about webhooks in general and then understand the event throttling mechanism. So if we search it here, we can see that it talks a little bit about the number of concurrent requests your endpoint can handle. And so the standard is 10. You can go up to 100. Requests can contain up to 100 events. So this is the maximum number of requests that HubSpot will try sending. So you have a request, and then you have a number of events in each request. And so that's where you can configure this right here. So you can change this. I'm going to keep it at 10 and leave it as is. And then you also have this link down here to documentation, which brings you to the exact same page that we clicked on in the learn more information icon here. But otherwise, pretty straightforward. You have your target URL that you would generate off of whatever application that you're using to receive these webhooks. And then you have your create subscription button where you will create your event subscriptions of the webhooks that will be firing. And so for this example, we're just going to use Zapier for the application that's receiving the webhook. It's a common platform that people use. You got Zapier, you have make.com. One thing I will note is that depending on what event subscriptions you're using, this could be a very, very expensive way of syncing data between systems if you're not careful. Just because Zapier and Make have both increased their prices significantly in recent years. So it doesn't really make sense to send a large quantity of webhooks to one of those platforms just to route them out to other systems. Obviously, you'll have to see for your business what makes sense, but a lot of times it makes sense to use a general cloud platform and their respective tools in order to receive these webhooks and then send out updates to other tools as needed. But we won't get into the details on that. That's something for you and your developers to decide. Obviously, if you need help with that decision and the architecture, reach out to us. It's stuff we specialize in. But let's continue here. So in Zapier, all I'm going to do is configure a catch hook trigger for the Zap itself. So I selected webhooks by Zapier. I clicked on catch hook, continue. I ignored the child key for now. And then I generated this webhook URL, which I'm going to copy. And I'm going to go back to HubSpot and then paste that in the target URL section right there. So that's the easy part. the next thing we're going to do is create a subscription. And when you go to create this subscription, you'll see that you can select all of the object types, the standard object types inside of HubSpot. Unfortunately, at the moment, you can't use custom objects in here. So you'd have to use a workflow instead, trigger the workflow based off of the custom object, and then post the webhook instead of configuring the webhook subscription right here. But otherwise, you can select any of the standard objects, and you can actually select multiple of them. As you can see, select one or more object types. And the only thing to watch out with that is the events are limited depending on what you select. So if I selected ticket, company, deal, product, and then I went to listen for which events, you'll see that there's grayed out options here. And that's just because of the combination of object types that we have configured. So if we eliminate those instead, and we just go down here, we'll just do, let's do contact because that's more standard. You'll see that we pretty much have almost every option for the events available, except for new message, which is just applying to conversations. And so we can select multiple, or we can keep it simple and select one, and then we can choose which events we want to send to this webhook. And so depending on what you're using this for, you might select one or you might select multiple events. If you wanted to, for example, let's see, create, delete, property change. So this would pretty much be almost all updates for contact. Obviously, we can just choose all of these to actually capture all of the available events. You'd be able to send this to whatever endpoint, whatever target URL you put in there, and then you'd be able to filter based off of the event that is sent across. So HubSpot will include whether it was created, deleted, property change, etc. And then you can filter and then route based off of that value itself. One note is that if you choose the property changed event, you'll also have to choose which properties you want to look for that have changed. And so the really easy one, whoops, I thought modified was in there, but it's not. It's just, it looks like it's properties that are not the modified or created. Yeah. So basically any property that you want to monitor in general, let's say we have a close date that we want to monitor or lead status, you can add those. You can add as many as you want here, depending on what you're trying to do. And then once you configure that, you'll see HubSpot will tell us which required scopes we need. And instead of having to configure it up front in the scopes window, we can just click on add this required scope. And so once the subscription is created, HubSpot will go through and add those scopes to this webhook. And so that's the easiest way that I've found to make sure I have the correct scopes while also not creating any unnecessary additional scopes. Just from a security standpoint, it's better to do it that way. So as you can see, pretty straightforward. You just have to have a plan in mind when you go to create these webhook subscriptions, know which object types you want to monitor, know which events you want to monitor. And then if you're doing any property changed events, then you'll want to know which properties you want to look for in terms of when they change values. So comparing this to how it used to have to be done, which is using workflows for each object type and then creating the webhook for that event, it's a lot less maintenance doing it this way. HubSpot's going to send over everything based off of these events and these object types, and we don't have to go through and create tons of workflows in order to sync data between different platforms. And basically before you had the workflow option for the low code option of sending webhooks other places. And then you also had the developer option of actually configuring an architecture that's automated using the API in order to capture different events and send webhooks to various places. So this is a much better option to keep it relatively low code so that a super admin could maintain this type of thing or create some soft integrations between different types of tools. So really useful here. And I really like the streamlining of this process, because it's just a mess when you have to do it through workflows or get a developer involved. It kind of changes the scope and cost of everything. So this is much easier to do. So I'm just going to click on subscribe there. And you can see here that we have all of these different event subscriptions that were generated. And the beautiful thing about this is that once you have the private app configured, you can even change the subscription. So you can pause, unsubscribe from different events and from different objects here. So we could do an entire object and pause it. We could then reactivate it. We could unsubscribe completely for it. So it really saves on the configuration end. Systems aren't static. They change, APIs change, your needs change as a business. And this really lets you be flexible in terms of the configurations. I just like to imagine how difficult this would be if you were managing this through workflows, or if you had a developer building this, then it might be a little more difficult or take a little bit more time to change this type of configuration outside of HubSpot in a non-graphical way. So this is really useful. You can even see details for sample event payloads. HubSpot makes it super easy for you to see exactly what they're going to be sending over and how you can use that for development in your other systems. So this is pretty much it for the webhooks. I mean, right now we created what we wanted to create. We set up the target URL. We learned about event throttling. You can always create more subscriptions here, but otherwise you just click on create app, continue creating. And then what we'll do for the last thing is just to show a test here. So I'm going to test trigger. No request is found because we haven't fired anything yet. And then I'm just going to open up a new window here and make a change to the lead status for one of our test contacts. So we can just see how this operates. So I'm going to click on our test contact, and then I'm going to change the lead status. I believe was one of the events we were monitoring. So I'm going to do that. MQL. Click on save. I don't know why it didn't update there, so I changed it to SQL, and then it worked. And I'm going to test this trigger again. Looks like nothing was found, so I'm going to go back to the private app. I'm going to refresh this page. And then, now that I think about it, I actually did lifecycle stage, not lead status, which is why it didn't update. So I'm just going to change this to new instead, and then click on save. And then we're going to go back to Zapier, and hopefully this one works. Yep, there we go. So make sure you update the right field or right property if you're going to be testing this stuff out. But you can see here that we have different data that came across. And you can see that the subscription type is contact.property change. So we know what type of subscription triggered this webhook, and then we can use that to process elsewhere. You can see we got the object ID sent over, the property name, property value, change source. So this payload is going to look different depending on your subscription type, and just make sure that you understand the different data structures that are coming across so that you can use it to process everything successfully. So that's pretty much it with private apps. The last thing I'll go through is just that you can make sure to use the private app screen here to go ahead and edit the app if you want to make changes later. You can see from the Webhooks tab here as well all of your event subscriptions, and you can see this total count of this specific subscription. I can click on it to see the logs. So HubSpot really gives you very useful information when you're going to audit or look at logs associated with the private app webhooks. So hopefully this video was useful. I'm Dan Saavedra from mergerdata.com. This is the type of stuff we do. We're the marketing sidekicks for marketers who are understaffed inside of their organization. So we handle the data side of things so that you can get back to the marketing activities that really move the needle. So hopefully you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.